Well, hello, book nerds. Welcome to the Book Nerds podcast. It is the beginning of 2022, and what a book! The first non-fiction book that I picked up this year has been quite something. It's called Treaty of Peace, Friendship, and Cooperation of 1971 by Achala Moulik, who is a prolific author and a well-known author. And of course, we are here to talk about the book, discuss the book. Also with us is Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar and Dr.Uday Balakrishnan for their first impressions about the book. And in fact, they have reviewed the book also. So I'll be asking them about what they felt about the book. But before all of that, welcome to all of you to the Book Nerds podcast. Welcome to all of you to the podcast. Am I audible?
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Rohan. Great pleasure
For a
to be here.
second, for a second, I thought the screen has frozen. So,
No.
No.
I was worried. I was worried because ma'am, we're about to get. We have gotten snow actually in Missouri, and I am in Dehradun. So I thought the screen had also frozen. But anyways, pardon me for that bad joke. But I would like to tell the viewers and the readers a little bit about Achala Moulik. She has received her education in Washington, New York, London, and Rome, where her parents were posted on diplomatic assignments. She graduated from London University with a degree in economics, history, international relations, and international law. In the IAS, she served as Director General of ASI and Education Secretary, Government of India. She has written a whole lot of books on Russian history and culture and is recipient of the Pushkin Medal and Yesenin Prize. I have personally read um, two other books of hers, one by Niyogi Books, and of course the other one by Authors Upfront. And thank you, Authors Upfront, for letting us do this. Of course, other speakers. Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar is with us. Believe it or not, he's a postgraduate in physics from DU. And I was surprised by that he is now in a completely different way. And is a career diplomat, has served as ambassador of India to Kazakhstan, Sweden, and Latvia, as well as secretary, principal executive officer of the National Foundation for Communal Harmony, and which is very important at this point in time in India, especially an autonomous organization with the Ministry of Home Affairs, Government of India. He has also held several significant positions in Indian embassies in Washington, D.C., Moscow, Brussels, Geneva, Bangkok, so on and so forth. We have with us Dr. Uday Balakrishnan, although I would like to call him just a wonderful book reviewer, but he has got so many other credentials as well. Of course, his book reviews have been, I've been reading them in the Hindu since the 90s, and he's a former officer of the 1975 batch of the Indian Postal Service. He has worked across India in areas of logistics, banking, insurance, financial inclusion, child, you name it. And of course, he retired voluntarily in 2010 as member of the Postal Services Board and chairman of the investment board to pursue other interests. He's also an academic. He teaches at IISc. We have a lot to look forward to. I have, kind of taking up too much time. I would like to straight away go to the author and ask her about the inception of the book. It is an important book for academics and, of course, first-time readers and young students who don't know much about modern history.
Yeah, well, this is where I take off because I find that the young people when we were young, I mean, the speakers are younger than me, but when my generation was young, we had a lot of interest in international affairs. I may be mistaken, but I find it is more on the technical aspect of international relations which interests them. And I felt that many of them were not aware of India's relation with Russia. And I felt this on two occasions when I went to Russia with a group of Indians to do a play for the Year of India and Russia. The young actors and actresses had very little idea of what Russia was, what our connection with Russia was. As for this treaty, there was very little knowledge. So it was this which prompted me to write it in the 50th year of India's signing this book, this treaty. And I think the Ambassador Sajjanhar may disagree with me, but I feel that at this juncture, very little has been done to celebrate this occasion. And I'm rather disappointed to see that there have been seminars. I don't want to mention the one particular which should have done it. Seminars in organizations, newspapers, like this discussion about the liberation of Bangladesh, about the role of the Indian Army, which was very, very heroic, but very little about the Soviet input here. And that, I think, is unhistorical and a little ungrateful. Because, pardon, and while I was doing research on this, I read the correspondence which went in. And Mrs. Indira Gandhi's tremendous role in the way she managed. I know there is attempt to downplay our leaders once they're out of power. This is another bad habit the Indians have. Worship them when they're in power and then forget them when they're gone. And Indira Gandhi's role was, I would say, equal, and I've read European history, is that like any Bismarck or Cavour, the way she managed this crisis, and she was flying from America to India, stopping in Rome, where my parents were there, and my father asked her, he had known her earlier, what was the thing, Indiraji? And she shook her head and said, Dr. Moulik, we have very little friends left. I don't know what to do. She was practically in despair, though they had signed the treaty by then. So arraigned against China on one side, America on the other, they had become good buddies after 50 years of estrangement, and Pakistan, which was determined to see that East Bengal, as we like to call it, shall not be dismembered. And Mrs. Gandhi, India was being threatened by Kissinger, by Nixon, by the Chinese, by the Pakistan, that let the genocide go on in Bangladesh, let millions of Bengalis, Hindus and Muslims be murdered, butchered, violated, but nobody should interfere. And she did try for a while not to get involved, until the refugees flowed in. And Calcutta, I remember going there just then for some duty. And I was amazed that the city was just bursting at the seams. It was already a refugee city after partition, and it became unbearable. I mean, everywhere, and the Salt Lake actually began then. So at that juncture, she put her colleagues together, called General Manik Shaw. She said, can we start now? He gave her all the timing. Don't do it in the monsoon, don't do it when the rabi crop is there. And it was a marvelous, discussion between the Prime Minister, Foreign Minister, and General, and other army people. And that's when we signed the treaty on August 9th, and then they waited for development, by which time the Indian Army had also entered Mukti Bahini. Now this has been so underplayed, this whole joint effort of the Russian government, Soviet government, the Indian government, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, Andrei Gromyko, Mr. Brezhnev. I think this I felt it required that. I haven't written a detailed book, but I think it needed to be told to young Indians and foreigners. They should also know, those who are interested in it. And today, we have a friendly Bangladesh, a country which has been liberated from oppression, from genocide. And when I went to Bangladesh, I saw the amity that was there, particularly among the intellectuals. So this is, I think, a very heroic and a very moving story. And I was watching this whole. My personal interest was because my parents on both sides came from Bangladesh, East Bengal as it was then, undivided Bengal. And they never forgave the then government, particularly Mountbatten, that Nehru who played along for the partition. And it seems now, in hindsight, we can say there was no need for partition of Bengal. Every time they've tried to do it, cousin. So this, I think, is one of the moving stories post independence, and I hope people come to know of it and the role played.
Thank you, ma'am. And I would like to straight away go to Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar because Achala ma'am has raised a question and a valid one. First and foremost, your first impressions about the book, because I mean it's great to perhaps uh, ma'am has got Achala ma'am has got all the information and experience to write a book like this. But what do you think about the book itself? I really wanted to know your impressions.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Rohan, for inviting me to this program, and my warmest felicitations to my very dear friend and the author of this book, Achala Moulik, for bringing this out. My first reaction, that is what you sought, I was delighted to get the book in my hand and to go through it. And one of the strong points as far as the book, I think, is concerned, although it is all full of facts and figures and dates and everything, but it's a very easy read. And I personally can say that, I was able to finish it in two sittings of about 2 hours each. So it is, it has a lot of information, it has a lot of detail, it is very meticulously researched. So in that context, it's a wonderful book, but it's also very easy on the mind, on the eyes. I would like to congratulate authors upfront also, because their typesetting, because the formatting, everything is very user friendly, consumer friendly. So I was very happy to go through it. And if you permit, Rohan, if I could respond to what Achala has mentioned,
Sure,
because
sure.
I fully concur with her. I fully agree with her that this both this occasion, and I would also like to say that our relationship with the Russian Federation, that needs to be brought much more in focus. We need to speak about it much more. I have now been in the country, after my last tenure as ambassador of India to Sweden and Latvia. I came back about 9 years ago, and I have seen that the focus that is provided to our relations with the United States, and I'm not saying that it's a bad thing. I think it's a very good thing. After all, it is our most important strategic partner, global strategic partner with a comprehensive global relationship. It's very good that we have focus on that. The importance that is given to China, to Pakistan, and maybe to some of the other countries in the neighborhood. Achala was speaking about relations with Bangladesh. It is all very good, but I think we need to pay greater focus on our relations with Russia also. I'll make just 2 points here. One is, I remember that in 2014, when Prime Minister Modi had traveled to Fortaleza, just after he came to power, and there
Yes.
he had met Putin. He had gone there for the BRICS summit. And he had said, if you ask anyone in India, even a child on the street, as to which is the most important friend and partner of India, without even thinking, that person will say it is Russia, which is true. I think in terms of that people to people contact and understanding and affinity and comfort level, that is there. But in the strategic and in the intellectual fields, I think that focus and attention is missing. The second point that I would like to very quickly say is that, what Achala has done, it's yeoman service or yeowoman service that she has provided, because the situation globally is today is not the same as it prevailed, 50 years ago. That time, the life was very simple. Cold War, two major powers, Soviet Union, one of them, India, a non-aligned power, and all that sort of things. But today, things are much more complex. And in that complex situation, when there is a huge flux of geopolitics taking place, India needs Russian Federation to be a very strong partner. And I would say that Russian Federation also needs India equally. And so it is in mutual interest of both countries. And that is why you would have seen that we had Mr. Putin travel to India, just for a few hours, on the 6th of December. His travel time both ways must have been about 3 or 4 times the time that he spent in Delhi. But he made this point because I think this was a message that was to be sent to the United States that India, or notwithstanding its very strong partnership with the US, it's also a very strong partner of Russia. We had the summit, we had the 2+2, we had the extension of our defense agreement for 10 years. And I think it was also for Mr. Putin a message being sent out to China, because we know that China and Russia are very strong partners, all courtesy the United States and the West, because they really pushed Russia into the embrace of China. But I think Mr. Putin, Russia, like India, wants a multipolar world. Russia does not want an Asia dominated by China or a world dominated by China. So, in that sense, it was also a message to China. And if Russia has to stand in terms of maintain its independent stance vis-a-vis China, there is no other country that can come to its help except India. So let me stop here because I know that we have other
Right. I think so. There was a slight kind of. I think.
Over to you, Rohan.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. I would like to now go to Dr. Uday, and first of all, I wanted to ask about your impressions about the book, and also when you are picking up a non-fiction book, since you are a book reviewer and you've done this for a long time, what are the top three things that you expect from it to get right? For you to like the book, or perhaps it adds value to your life or knowledge base.
Hmm. I could certainly get on with the book. Ashok has summarized it so beautifully. In fact, he has said a lot of things I wanted to say. Mrs. Achala Moulik has also done that. So, on the whole, my comments will be a little different from what has all of you have already heard. So, the first and most important thing in this is that it's a book which tells you about a very important event in our history. This was the first and probably the only alliance we had, uh, in terms of a military alliance almost. So why almost? It was a military alliance where we promised to, come to each other's aid in case somebody came against us. Anyway, the big thing about the book is that it tells us that Russia was on the right side of history. One of my very good friends, let me just put it out. I don't know how this, excuse me for 1 minute. I thought I had muted my phone, I'm sorry. You see, Russia has been on the right side of history for ever since the Cold War began. And that's something which we need to accept. Everywhere the Americans and the West were supporting regimes which are absolutely brutal, which are absolutely undemocratic. Russia has been on the side of people who have been fighting for liberation, who have been fighting for wars which were really in coming to the help of people who were in very bad situations, especially caused by the West. And they named a whole university after Patrick Lumumba in Russia. So we are coming to a situation where, as one Russian told me once, you see, we have been much harder on ourselves than we have been on the world. We have been extremely kind to the world, but we've been very hard on ourselves. So we know what happened in Russia. It had its own internal difficulties. It had its gulags. It had its problems. But that was part of becoming Russia at some stage. And Russians have always had this sort of a situation where they've been very hard on themselves through history. But at the same time, in this particular book, what stands out is, why did Russia come to our support? at a time when the most powerful country in the United States was already aligning with China and uh, literally trying to uh, talk us out of getting into Bangladesh in any big way, in what is now Bangladesh in any big way. So the book really brings out a very big point which we tend to ignore, that this alliance which Russia and India was entered into after a great deal of thought. It was not something which was purely for that moment, for getting us a free hand to move into Bangladesh when it needed to be liberated. So this is something which Mrs. Moulik's book brings out very beautifully, that there is a past to this relationship which sort of brings us forward to the treaty. It's not as if it's something which happened just overnight. It happened because uh, because of a certain friendship which had evolved. When India and Russia started off after independence, it was not exactly a very pleasant relationship. Stalin had kept with our ambassador waiting for years. He didn't even meet her. So from there, we evolved into extremely good friends. And Chester Bowles, no less a person than an American ambassador to India, in an article in Foreign Affairs, brings it out very beautifully, saying Russia aided India so much, to $1 billion in those days. That's a lot of money. And they helped us, establish IIT Mumbai. They established our steel mills. They helped us with our arms, with our arms industry. The mix came in during that time, and up to today, Russia is our main arms supplier. Without Russia, we cannot fight a single battle. So, in this sense, this extreme lack of gratitude we have shown, I must say, in not highlighting the contribution of the Russians during this year, the 50th anniversary, is particularly bad. And particularly, I would say, we aren't really distinguishing ourselves by that. And we aren't distinguishing ourselves by the fact that Indira Gandhi was a prime mover in this. I mean, in fact, without her, where was the question of Bangladesh being liberated? Look at the amount of effort that she made. She communicated with the world's leaders. She mounted a huge propaganda effort about the situation on the border with Bangladesh, about what Pakistanis were doing there. It was everywhere in the news. And you know about the Pakistani correspondent who defected and who wrote that very long articles on the disaster that was happening in Bangladesh. I think Mascarenas, I think if I'm not mistaken, his name was that. Anyway, he moved out of Pakistan, fled Pakistan to write and bring this to the attention of the world. So we had a very moral case, and in a very moral case, Russia came to support us. And this is what Mrs. Moulik's book brings out very beautifully. Another thing that really comes out is the fact that unfortunately, right now our relationship with Russia has gone through a small bad patch, but it has recovered, I think, from Putin's visit. It is back to getting on the rails, in the sense that, in a sense, geography binds Russia and India together. Russia is not exactly China's friend. They had a very bitter border war in '67, if I'm not mistaken, and and China is between us. Between the two borders. So I'm not. I think the geopolitical importance of India has been realized by Russia too, as Ashok so beautifully put it. So I think, on the whole, the book brings this out, and it is a book, I think, which should be read by all sections of our society, to know that India was not created, Bangladesh was not created all by the Indian army, but there was a principal mover in it in Indira Gandhi, and an equally, I'm not saying any less. Without Russia coming in with this, entering into this treaty with us, we would never have had a Bangladesh. We would still have a East Pakistan there, because the Americans would have had their way. They were 71. They were already aligning with the China. And from what I have read, they were also asking China to create enough tensions on the border for us not to get too excited about Bangladesh entering Bangladesh and liberating it. I think those are facts of history. So, in the sense, this is a fantastic book, in the sense that it rejogs our memory of an event that should have been principled and which should have been commemorated in a very big way now, which we haven't done. And I must congratulate Mrs. Moulik for having done it. And her book, I mean, it's really a beautiful cover. So I'm again showing it off. It's really a wonderful, I know it's a wonderful, wonderful book, and it's a wonderful effort. And congratulations to you and to the author, I must say. She's done a great job. And that's my point of view. And Russia has been on the right side of history. This is another thing which we need to recognize. Whether it was in Iran, whether it was in Africa, whether it was in Mozambique after 400 years when there was a liberation struggle going on in Mozambique or Angola, it was the Russians who were helping them. It was the West, the Americans and the others who were really promoting through South Africa. They were promoting an enormous civil war in which they were trying to devastate the liberation struggle, finish the liberation struggle altogether. So I think we have a wonderful book on our hands. It brings a huge amount of geography into it. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, Dr. Uday. I wanted to, ma'am, talk about a portion of the book. It's quite early in the book, but I would like to quote from here. You have said that of course, we need to talk about Tagore if you're talking about all this, because the cultural exchange is so very important in all of this. Without that, I suppose perhaps things wouldn't work out. It's written here: the transformation of the workers and peasants, as if by magic, is like a story from the Arabian Nights. Gurudev wrote, the immense effort made by the Russians for the welfare of the ordinary people cannot be imagined by Indians who have lived under British rule. Until seeing conditions in Russia, I did not believe it possible to have such progress in just a decade. They are trying to obliterate the injustices of a millennium in a decade. They have accepted suffering and sacrificed their lives for a new society. They are tightening their belts and striving to build a new order. But they have to do this swiftly because they have many adversaries. And of course, you go on to, tell us about Tagore. And of course, you have talked about Letters from Russia, which was published in 1931 in your hometown. So tell us a bit about that, because that is, I would say, in the perspective. I mean, for the book, it might not be that important, but I love this part. It's the Book Nerds podcast, and you talked about Tagore. So what better?
Well, my friendship with Russia began with that book. I was 7 years old, and I still don't understand. I said this before. Why my father gave me this book to read on a long journey from Calcutta to Washington. And I was a difficult child, so he thought this would keep me occupied on the long. And it was not one direct plane; you had to halt here and there, and 14 hours Atlantic crossing. And I was reading it, and I was fascinated by this country. It's written in such beautiful, simple Bengali, and it was so picturesque. And especially when he wrote that people would not be allowed into this opera house or theaters in the old days, even as cleaners. Today they are sitting here and watching theaters and concerts in their muddy boots and frayed overcoats. And this was an impossible thing for a little girl grown up in a very privileged middle class family to understand. So it became it became something like a holy grail I wanted. And then, of course, when I was in school, and it was the 40th year of Russian Revolution. I was in London, and my father had lots of friends in the Soviet embassy. So it you won't believe that the Russians took London by storm. I mean, people queued up for 5 kilometers to see Chekhov's plays and everything. So this, I would say, Rabindranath Tagore was probably the best ambassador to Russia, the informal ambassador, and he was one of the first foreigners to go to see the Soviet experience. Now you have to say Tagore was not, Gurudev was not a communist, he was not from the poor, deprived class, he came from a very aristocratic, rich, part of the Indian Renaissance, and he was a great believer. He believed totally in God, in the Upanishad. And he said, how many blows I have got from God, but I've still not forgotten him. So for that man to be so enchanted by an atheist, rational, communist society, I think that showed his own perception of the future. And he came back and talked about it. And he took some of the rural reconstruction and introduced in Shantiniketan, which is my hometown. And immediately the British censored the book. They took all the copies, but you see, the Bengalis are very ingenious people. So they had an underground press in Vishwabharati, and they began printing, translating, and print all over India. And strange, this I hate to say, but Gandhiji was not all that enthusiastic about this society. He tried to play it down for whatever reasons I don't understand. So our friendship with Russia goes back much longer than Nehru and Nikita Khrushchev, even to go. And as I've said in the introduction, we had the first travelers to come to India, and not travelers like the Portuguese who were trying to look for commercial enterprise, or trying to see whether we could build forts and great hermans. They just came. Afnasi Nikitin's book, which I'm sure Ashok has read, and it's enchanting and full of respect and affection for what he saw. And the first Hindu temple outside India was built in Baku. You may have seen that, Ashok. The fire worship temple, and the Tsar Alexander III, who was an autocrat and a very devout Christian, he went to the temple. He said, I want to know more about this religion. So there has been a lot of, though this is a Christian European nation, but they have great interest in India. And therefore, I thought the Treaty of Friendship was really a culmination of a very long relationship and a very respectful relation. And the way Leo Tolstoy supported the Indian rebels during the mutiny is something wonderful. And there's another Tsar, who was Nicholas I, an out and out reactionary. He would have his Preobrazhensky guards ready to go and quell any rebellion. When he heard about the inhuman treatment, how they were sending Indian rebels on the mouth of cannon, Tsar Nicholas wrote to Queen Victoria, you're bringing a bad name to European civilization. Execute them, but don't do it in this savage way. So we've always had support from Russia, even earlier, pre-independence, 19th century. So, and people like a whole lot of, I'm sure Ashok knows about them, having been director of the India Cultural Center in Moscow. The amount of Soviet studies on Indology is fantastic. I was telling Uday yesterday that we think of the Indian Renaissance as having begun in 19th century under Ram Mohan Roy, but a very famous lady, a famous Indologist, Madame Vyshinskaya, she has gone back and she made a very, very wonderful point, saying the Indian Renaissance began with the Bhakti movement. That was the resurgence of India in the middle of a great series of invasions. So they went into our civilization with depth and with great understanding. And I think this treaty seemed like the culmination. I hope Mr. Putin's visit keeps it alive.
So, thank you, ma'am. I would like to go to some questions that people are posting in the comments. And there are some, there's some for all and some particularly, for the author and the speakers. Let me go to the first one. This is by Sweta, who is saying, who is more reliable for India, Russia, or US in the current scenario? And it's an open one, so anybody can take it. Ashok, sir, would you like to take this one?
Yeah, sure. So I think what basically we need to look at is, again, what Achala was speaking, what you were mentioning also, Rohan. I think soft power is good, culture is good, but ultimately, in terms of relations, when you determine between countries, it is what your interests are at that particular moment. Just to, let's say, take this example, 1971, we had the best of relations with the Soviet Union. We signed this treaty on the 9th of August, and we had, the USS Armada, 7th Fleet, USS Enterprise, nuclear-powered enterprise coming in the Bay of Bengal.
Yeah.
And as Achala has mentioned, I think Uday has also mentioned, that it was an attempt to intimidate India. so that there would be no division as far as Pakistan is concerned, because Pakistan had suddenly become, not suddenly, meaning it had become a very good friend of the United States, because it had helped Nixon and Kissinger to make this visit to China in before that 1971. So they did not want to. They wanted to preserve Pakistan as a whole, and so they were trying to encourage, incite, and provoke China also to launch an attack against India in the northern borders, also trying to provoke the United Kingdom. So this was 1971. But today, you see, United States is our most valued partner, strategic partner, I would say. It is, as I sort of briefly mentioned earlier, it's a comprehensive global strategic partnership. But as far as Russia is concerned, also, we signed a strategic partnership in 2000. We upgraded it to a global and to a special and privileged strategic partnership in 2010. So both of these are extremely valuable partners for us. So there are issues of divergence with both of them. For instance, as far as the United States is concerned, it threatens to impose what is called the CAATSA, what is known as the Countering America's Adversary Through Sanction Act. That if any country has relations in areas of defense, very significant relations with Russia, Iran, or North Korea, then this it's a statutory provision that they will impose this. But India has, notwithstanding all this, we follow an independent foreign policy, and we have imported S-400 costing about $5.4 billion, and sort of, make in India as far as AK-203, 700,000 of these in India, etc. So we continue to maintain very strong relations with Russia, notwithstanding what the United States says. And Russia has issues and problems as far as India's membership partnership of the Quad is concerned, of the Indo-Pacific is concerned. But we know what is in our interest, because we have this expansionist power on our northern border, that is China. There's not only a threat, but they have also invaded us. So I think, to cut the whole story short, both of these relationships are very important, and we need to nurture, and we need to take them forward, promote them. That is exactly what is being done currently. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I hope that answers your question, Sweta. Let's take the next one, and this one is by Arushi Bansal. She's saying that, hi, ma'am, Achala ma'am, this is for you. You have showed the concern about deteriorating relationship between the two countries. Could you please shed a brief light on the same?
Well, this was this deterioration. Well, maybe that's a strong word, but slight lessening of the warmth which was coming,
Right.
because of the, I think it was due to, Ashok can confirm it, it was India's overt friendship, overt, warmth and overtures to America. And there, I think, where our government tries to, I think, to put the countries, this sounds very rebellious, but to put the country's interest subordinate to the diaspora, Indian diaspora, seems to me a little unfair. We all have children there, and God bless them if they want to become tycoons, but the interest of the country must supersede those of the Indian diaspora, who have a lot to say in the matter. And I think the Russians began to feel that. For the last 20 years, I think it began with Dr. Manmohan Singh, who's made such foolish statements as Mr. Bush is after he invades Iraq, Indians love you. How does he know? How does he voice the opinion of 1.2 billion people? I mean, these sort of things, they really are most undiplomatic to go and say, yes, we need America. America, as Ambassador has said, it's a very important relationship, but it has to be weighed entirely according to India's interest. And there has been lessening of the warmth. For instance, I saw the Year of India and Russia in 2009, and the ICCR was not able to get enough people. I spoke to the then director and whatever. So why don't you get some real good theatrical groups to come? Why are you just sending the usual? In fact, the person who figures in this book, Ambassador Kadakin, he said there's more to relation between India and Russia than Bhangra dance and bear circus.
There's an entire chapter actually about him in the book, and it's called Memories of
Because he
Alexander.
was a very great friend of India.
Yeah.
When there was an attack in Pathankot, I believe before Moscow could clear it, he went to the foreign ministry and said, "We are totally behind India and we'll help you track down these people." Now, who has shown this warmth to us?
Yeah.
Unreservedly. And I think there the deterioration became, and they felt it. Mr. Kadakin felt it. Many of his friends felt it. And now with this Quad, I think they feel, and that we are joining, and quite frankly, we have no interest really in Quad.
Okay, I hope that answers your question, Arushi. And let's go to the next one. Let's see if Dr. Uday can take this one. This is about language. Yash Kumar asks, what was an early experience where you learned that language had power? And I think everybody can take it, but let's start with Dr. Uday.
I don't know whether language has power. Yeah, it certainly has. But what is interesting is, with Russia, the book itself. I mean, I hope the person who's asking the question, Yash Kumar, will also read the book. It brings out something very interesting, that the Russians are a warm people. Because her personal relationships with many Russian diplomats and with many Russians has brought that. It's well brought out in this book. What I would suggest is that rather than the language had power, what language, I'm not able to figure out what the question is exactly, but I'm able to understand Russia, a country which is warm, which is affectionate to India, and such affection has not diminished even today. And it's probably even more important for Russia, which is no longer the USSR, to have a great friendship with India.
Yeah.
So it has to cut both ways, and I'm sure we are also trying to go through. We are making enough. We are making good and powerful statements that we are back to trying to normalize our relationships with Russia and take it back to something of what it was in the past.
I think, sir, I think his question may be that this was the first time you realized that perhaps language can help you express yourself or kind of, be that power which can make change. I think it is directed towards that, perhaps.
It's the nuances of the language rather than what language. Russians and
Yes.
Indians don't speak in the same tongue. In fact, we need translators to speak to each other. But the fact remains that Russia itself, the warmth of this relationship has been brought out in many different ways. And it's not just the political level. And I think Russia has proven to be a very reliable partner. In fact, it's supplying us with the very latest equipment, which are the very things which are enabling us to counter China. So the language itself is something which communicates an intent. And I think the way the Russian statements have been about India have been very generous to us. And lately, so have ours been. So I don't think it has been enough. But what is important is when you read the book, it comes out that the Russians as a people have loved India. I mean, let's go beyond all this politics. That we have to understand. With America, the relationship is a lot more transactional. I give you, you give me. You come and join me here, I'll join you there. I'll help you here, I won't. And then another thing is, America, by virtue of being a democracy, and India also suffers from the same defect, it's a fickle partner. They'll be friends with us one day, and tomorrow they'll turn around and turn totally against us. So I think America has a reliability problem with us, but and our language with them is also, we are actually pussyfooting after buying the S-400 missiles. We are trying to see that we don't get shut out of American equipment. We don't come under American sanctions and all that. It's a relationship between two porcupines. But unfortunately, fortunately, our relationship with Russia is much more even. And there is another important factor which I am realizing because my course right now, which I'm teaching, has a lot of element of climate change in it. See,
Yeah.
as ice melts and Siberia becomes a cultivable area, I think the Chinese will be eyeing it, India will be eyeing it. We also have a very good interest in opening out those places for ourselves. I think the Chennai Vladivostok connection, about which Ashok probably knows a little more than I do. These are all things which are coming up, and Russians have a long-term view, just as the Chinese have a long-term view. But democracies, uh, by virtue of the political system, they really go wax and wane in every way. That includes India also, includes Russia, includes the United States.
Right.
So I leave it at that. I don't think I need to amplify a bit. I hope
Thank
it
you.
satisfies the
Thank you
person
so
who
much.
has asked the question.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, Another couple of questions, and then we'll talk about something else, which I mean, I would take some book recommendations from you. But one question is there. So Bala Subramaniam is asking, was the fall of Soviet Union due to the political or economic reasons, or a conspiracy by Americans? And
Yeah.
yeah, sure, ma'am, please take it.
Well, the fall of Soviet Union had enumerated in this book, but much more in detail in my book on the Russian Revolution.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons was the tragic intervention in Afghanistan, and it was like a playing out of a Sophoclean tragedy. They had to go in, even though they knew, most of them, especially Yuri Andropov, he knew that this was quicksilver, and he warned them against it because it ate their resources, it injured, wounded 50,000 of their young men, and it earned it. They lost some of their friends among the Islamic factions, and that weakened Russia. But I think, and that was a trap because Robert Gates, who was then the security advisor to President Carter, he said, because Russians were supporting the socialist government in Afghanistan, he said, let's start an insurrection there, and Russians will have to come in, Islamic insurrection. So Russia has to come in, and then it becomes a civil war in which it will. So America and China, the great friend, they armed the Mujahideen to the hilt, and they did it in Xinjiang province for which the Uyghurs were used. So, and Pakistan also. So these three. But I think the inevitability of history is that it had perhaps the Soviet Union had outlived its needs. Perhaps the world was changing, the economies were changing, market economy was a challenge. So it was disintegrating. But the immediate catalyst, I think, was the intervention in Afghanistan, which drained them
Right.
and demoralized them.
Great. Thank you so much, ma'am. I would like to go to now one by one to everyone to get some book recommendations. Of course, we are here to discuss Achala ma'am's book, and of course, everybody, all the readers who are here, whoever have asked the questions, they should go and grab a copy from Amazon and buy the book, find the cover right here. I'll just put it in focus. But Ashok sir, first perhaps a couple of book recommendations from you other than Achala ma'am's books. Those are already there. I'll pin up the links also. Uh, some recent books that you might have read and found worthy of perhaps recommending.
You see, at the moment, Rohan, there is not nothing that comes to my mind currently because I think I have been busy in writing my own book, so to say.
Oh, wonderful,
So
wonderful. What's it
that
about, sir?
is
Can you share? What's it
yeah,
about?
it is something about Central Asia. That is something that Achala has been telling me for quite some time. So,
Wonderful,
and I'm sure, and that will be my first book, having written many
wonderful.
monographs and other things. And as I'm sure Achala and you will also be able to appreciate, and also
Surely.
Uday, that once you are dealing with a book, then you blank yourself to everything else that is happening around.
True.
So that is why I would, not be in a position to recommend something at the moment. But if you permit, I'll just add a few words on why, in addition to what what all of us have said, why Achala's book makes an excellent read and an excellent buy, because it is not only dealing with let's say hundred of years of relations between India and Russia, of in fact thousands of years of relations between the two countries, but it is really using 1971 as a pivot, as a peg, and around that it is weaving the whole superstructure of our ties. And I would say India and Russia are the only, possibly the only two big countries in the world that have never really had any conflict with each other. We are more or less neighboring countries. We are very close to each other, but we have never had any conflict. Where most of the times we have been on the same page, on the same side, on all major issues. Even if there have been some differences, for instance, more recently in the case of Afghanistan, very quickly we have again come, because our interests are similar, our ideologies are similar. We are very much on the same page. And going forward, I think it is not only the past, it is not only the present, but Achala also deals with the future as to what we can hope for and anticipate as far as future of this partnership is concerned. So, I think something was mentioned about the Arctic, our cooperation, what are the possibilities, what is the potential there, about the far east of Russia, which is such a huge area, very rich in resources, but very sparsely populated. We've also mentioned Central Asia, and I think everyone on this program is aware of what is happening in Central Asia, in the largest country in Central Asia, that is in Kazakhstan. So those issues, connectivity, there are a huge host of new areas where we can work together, in addition to the very many traditional areas of defense, of nuclear energy, of space, science, and technology. So all that Achala has brought into this book. So in this, I think about 200 plus pages, it is not only a broad brush of history and current geopolitics, but also a look into the future, into the gazing ball as to what heralds this relationship forward. Rohan.
Thank you so much, sir. And yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it any better. And you have encapsulated the entire book. And I mean, it is very important, especially for I would say young students as well, because they will get a holistic sort of knowledge about what's happening and what has happened already. So I would recommend it to the youngsters in particular. Of course, I mean, all the academics can pick it up. But Dr. Uday, any recommendations from you?
Yeah, I have a particular book. That's why I was looking that side to see on my shelf what was available. And in fact, the book I would strongly recommend all our students to read when they think of Russia or the USSR as such. We should look at USSR, the one which signed the treaty with us, which enabled us to liberate Bangladesh, and Bangladesh itself owes a lot to Russia, indirectly or directly. But it was a multicultural entity, the USSR. Now it's a very Christian country, but Russia is a very Christian country. But what USSR was, and before that the Tsarist Russia, was a very multicultural entity. In the sense that it had a lot of Muslims, it had a lot of Christianity, and they were contending with how to harmonize these relationships. Between communities, between ethnic and religious divides, overcoming them. So there's a very nice book which I wanted to, when you asked me which book I should recommend, to understand. A big thing was lost when the USSR broke up. A multicultural entity was slowly evolving into a very successful nation, as such, where there were, in fact, all the leaders, as Ashok could bear me out, who are running all these stands are originally Russian communists in their own right, big, big ones. So this is a book which I recommend. It's called For Profit and Slar. It's by Robert Crew. It's a wonderful book on how once Russia came into Asia, they came into Central Asia, how it tried to integrate with Islam. It's a fantastic it's a fantastic story by itself. And I think it's extremely well told by this book by Robert Bloom. So I would recommend this as a good one. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And of course, I have been, I'm just jumping in, I don't know why, but I've been reading, of course, this one by Achala ma'am, which we're talking about. I've read this one, Dangerous Dispatches by Achala ma'am. And of course, I am reading this one by Manoj Ghosh, the journalist who has written about the Bangladesh war. So it was
He was
interesting.
a top reporter there when he was doing it. I
Yes,
know.
yes, yes, yes. So
It was
it has
quite
got, yeah, it has got like on ground report from ground zero. It's a wonderful account. There are some anecdotes as well. So it is. I mean, I'm having I would say a fun time. Exploring all that history. Achala ma'am, any recommendation from you? I shouldn't ask the author, but just one recommendation from you. Of
I
it.
read so many books. One about the Muslim influence in Spain, then again about, especially after what is happening in Kazakhstan, I started reading about Central Asia. So now that I've just finished one book and getting another ready, and you find it very difficult to, you know, concentrate, read something else. There's so many books to read.
And,
But I just
and will you be, ma'am? Sorry to intervene, but will you be the beta reader on Ashok sir's book, upcoming book, perhaps?
I'm sure it will be fascinating. He was in Kazakhstan, he was in Moscow, so it was a fascinating place. And now with
Thank
Kazakhstan, what is happening
Yeah.
makes it more interesting. It's a very turbulent place.
Yes,
I want to
unfortunately, it
actually
appeared to be
conclude.
the most stable
Like
of
to make,
countries, but it
one
is
point I'd like to
unfortunately
make
taken
what
down.
Achala's book is this, that
Yes.
it's a pity that the Indian academia, our scholars have not involved themselves enough in this subject. It's such a shame, in the sense that it's such a vast area, it's such a intense cooperation, and relationships has been going through so many ups and downs. This is the book that an Indian has written, which will take on this subject, which will tell the world what it was really like. It's such an intense relationship. So many things happened between these two countries, the USSR and India. And, Russia came later, but USSR and India, that was such an intense one back in a few decades. And that story, I'm surprised that our academics are not even touching it. There are occasional articles, probably I've seen one book by one, but nothing significant has come out. Such a shame. That's
And you
something
know,
which is right. Anyway, thank you. I don't want to go
let me
on.
add what you have said, that during the centenary of the Russian Revolution, during the launch and discussion, Ashok spoke about it at IIC, and the Russians made a great event out of it. In fact, they sort of broke all rules at their Christmas Day reception. They set apart a separate room where the book was on display to be sold. And the book on the Russian Revolution Centenary, which again was published by Authors Up Front, and Monish and his team did a fantastic job because it's a very thick volume. And you'll be surprised, the books were sold in the West, according to my publisher, many more in the West through Amazon than in India. Now, aren't the people interested in this epochal event, leave alone our friendship? I'm amazed.
Yeah.
I thought in India, which had such close ties, and the Indian Revolution, the Russian Revolution influenced not only India but the West also, but not very scant interest. Whereas it was read in the West, bought in the West. So I agree with what you have said.
Ma'am, we'll of course conclude the session. And one final thing, there was a contest on Instagram, and there is a participant who has given us a question, so we can't miss it before we conclude. I'll have to add it to the screen, and it will appear on the screen, and anybody can take it. So this is the question. I don't know if you can read it properly. I'll
Rohan,
read
could
it
you
out,
read it out,
perhaps.
please?
Yeah, I study in Ukraine. At the moment, I am in India for my winter vacations. So my question is, if Russia attacks Ukraine, what would India's stand be? Because India is quite close to Ukraine also. And how will it affect the future of Indian students in Ukraine? That's the gist of the question.
First of all, I don't think Russia will attack Ukraine. This is a hysteria done by one man particularly, and that is Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg. He's gone quite hysterical. Russia is at our door, and I think he's mainly interested in keeping his chair because NATO, without the Cold War, the NATO ceased to have any importance. And there, the much maligned President Trump, I think he realized that. But this is just an organization which has no meaning. How can you have countries like Armenia, others North Atlantic? Now, where is Ukraine North Atlantic? Where is Poland? So I think this is a hysteria building up, which is very unfortunate. I have no doubt that Russia will never invade Ukraine. They reclaimed Crimea. That was historically Russian territory from 1776. They took back Crimea because it was part of Russia. The Crimean War was a Russian war against France and Britain. And when they say annex, you take back what is yours. How people occupying Falklands and Malta can object to Crimea beats me. But I don't know, Mr. Sajjanhar Ambassador can say.
Quick comments on that one. It's a student who is worried about his future, perhaps.
Okay. What I think again, to a very significant extent, I will agree with Achala. I don't think Russia is going to invade Ukraine. Russia has, I think, very well-founded and very genuine security interests in its region. And there were these commitments and promises that were given to Mr. Gorbachev, before the disintegration of the Soviet Union, that the NATO will not come right up to the doorstep of the Russian Federation. And I think those commitments are being brushed aside, and from the West, particularly as far as America is concerned, they want to sort of push the envelope as much further as they can. Now, Russia has asked for certain security guarantees, that you remove all the missiles that you have placed in these countries, don't give NATO membership to Ukraine or to Georgia or to Moldova. My own understanding is that it would be possible for the West to accede to some of the requests and give those guarantees, maybe not in writing, but in some way or the other, so that Russia feels reassured. It might be difficult to take off the missiles, etc., from there. I think much of it is also being driven by some of the Eastern European countries like the Baltic states, Poland, etc., who are so opposed to very adversarial mood as far as Russia is concerned. So to cut the whole story short, I don't think that there is an attack going to take place. There might be these tensions by amassing all these troops, 100,000 troops on the border and all this military hardware. I think Russia will be able to achieve its objective of not allowing Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, etc., and even for that matter, Finland and Sweden to be members of NATO. So without a war, by this muscle flexing, and now I think Mr. Putin has some other reason to focus his, other places to focus his attention on. After all, 3,000 of his troops are in Kazakhstan. We have to see how that pans out. But I don't think that there's going to be any war or any attack by Russia.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. I hope the Andy Soul, I think, on the Instagram account, is satisfied with those answers, and his or her future is secure. I've had a great time. We went over time because there were so many questions. I didn't want to let them go because everybody was excited about this special session, a special podcast. Thank you so much to the speakers, Dr. Uday, Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar, and of course to the author, Achala Moulik, who has written this wonderful book. And I would recommend it to one and all. It's a great non-fiction book. You pick it, you get value. It's as simple as that. Go on Amazon, buy it, leave a review, and yeah. Thank you so much.
And must also thank the publisher,
yes,
who
yes,
who has done a great work on this, a lot of editing, and the cover entirely his. He dug it up from a postage stamp of 1971.
Yeah, and if you have a good non-fiction manuscript, do send it to authors up front. Perhaps he'll consider it. Thank you, Manish, for letting us do this. And I had a lovely time. One of the finest podcasts, I must say. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining
And
in
I
and
thank
commenting.
Ambassador and Dr. Balakrishnan for joining this session.
Thank you,
very
Ron,
much.
for calling
Thank
us.
you.
And
All the best.
Ashok, nice meeting you. And,
Great pleasure.
lovely. Great. Thanks, ma'am.
And all the very best to you, Achala.
Congrats.
Thank you, Rohan.
All the best.
Thank you, Uday. All the best.
Bye. Bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.